Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everybody. My name is Johnny Poole. I'm an enterprise architect with Qlik. I've been with Qlik 7 years. I also have a specialty in NPrinting, and today's presentation will be covering an aspect of NPrinting architecture which has seen a lot of enhancements recently. And that aspect that we're going to go through today is going to be NPrinting management of users and tasks. NPrinting, the first part of this presentation will cover the security background of NPrinting. We'll cover what users and groups are and security roles so that we have a good foundation for today's material. After that, we'll go through the various user management techniques. These user management techniques are meant to scale to hundreds, if not thousands of users, allowing you to synchronize your user systems with NPrinting so that you can distribute reports to different users every day if need be. Finally, we'll go through how to trigger the user updates and how we can manage those straight through Qlik. There's some fancy techniques that we'll get into towards the end that leverage the API that aren't as tricky to use as you might expect and offer a lot of benefits as well. Okay, so our first stop today is to just review the security that governs NPrinting for users' security roles as well as groups today. As a bit of a kickoff, let's go over what the concept of a user is. So in NPrinting, we have all kinds of users. We have default roles, which belong to administrators, developers, users in Newsstand. We have on-demand users. And we have passive recipients who just receive reports by email or get a report sent to them to a folder, for example. Now, the trick with NPrinting is that you have to create or import these users in advance. They're not dynamically created on the fly as the system moves ahead. You have to import, create, sync, and make sure that they're set up. NPrinting needs to be aware of users' email addresses, and that's why we do this step first. So users in NPrinting are identified by their email as well as a unique name. Those have to be unique per NPrinting user. And we can also assign a domain account, which is useful in synchronizing security systems with SAML JWT, but also for synchronizing with Qlik section access security. To augment the user's profile, we can link filters to users so that their data views that they're able to see through the reports are hard-coded to specific filters. We can assign them to be members of groups, which are distribution lists, if you will, in NPrinting. And we can also assign them capabilities, which are called security roles. So the associations with filters, groups, and roles are central to the profile of an NPrinting user. Security roles come in 4 flavors by default with NPrinting. Administrators have full access to all NPrinting applications, plus the system information. Developers are used to author NPrinting applications, as well as the main content, which is reports and tasks. Newsstand users are interactive users who log into the Newsstand portal to retrieve reports that have been sent to Newsstand or to create subscriptions. And every other user is basically just a recipient of an NPrinting report that's been sent to them. Now, security roles can be customized, so you can fine-tune the security level. You can fine-tune the capabilities as well as which applications different users have access to. An example of this is follows. In the NPrinting environment, I could define a finance application. So this is an NPrinting finance application. And that finance application will have a series of connections, reports, tasks, and filters, and perhaps conditions, all associated with that NPrinting application. And on the right, I could develop a custom security role called Finance Developers. And the Finance Developers will only be able to edit reports belonging to the finance application and no other application. At the same time, I can create a sales application. And if I have some administrators, I can define sales administrators to create the tasks and distribute reports, but only the ones that belong to the sales application and no other application. Same with HR. In HR, I can develop a series of segregated reports and tasks. And when my HR users want to do on-demand to run reports whenever they wish through their Qlik applications, they are only able to run reports that are part of the HR application. I can mix and match these as well. So my corporate newsstand users who log into newsstand are also filtered in terms of the reports that they can initiate, and those reports belong to either the finance application or the HR application. And then finally, I have my system administrators who can define the users, define the groups, the security roles, and other aspects of the system configuration. Okay, so let's start getting into the user management strategies. This is where the rubber meets the road and how I get my users synced or created in NPrinting so that my developers and administrators can begin to log into the system and users can start to receive their reports. The main method that we're going to use, at least for when we have a lot of users, is to leverage what we call user import tasks. Now, a user import task is where we establish a schedule and a connection to a third-party repository that contains the user information. And then we can sync it and push it into NPrinting on an ongoing basis. The two import sources that we support today with NPrinting are Excel and LDAP. Using Excel and LDAP, we can connect to these systems and import not only the user definitions, but also filters, groups, as well as the associations with security roles. Now, all of this can also be done by the API, and towards the end of the presentation, I will show you some fancy techniques to do that. But just know that when we are doing a user import, we are also going to be aware of the fact of which groups, which security roles, and if there's any filters that we want to associate with those users as well. Now, the first step we'll actually go through, this is Excel. First step I'm going to take you through is actually LDAP. So let's take a quick lay of the land. So we have our LDAP system. And within our LDAP server, we're going to have a list of users that we're going to have access to. And there's also groups that we can pull from. Now, we're going to be able to create users and create groups in NPrinting as we sync, as we do our sync from LDAP. But we're also going to be able to pick up memberships and security roles. So let's take a quick demonstration of that in the product today. First thing I'm going to do is log into my NPrinting system as an NPrinting administrator. And you'll notice when I come in here, today I don't have nearly any user. I have myself, Jonathan Poole, and I also have my generic system NPrinting administrator. I don't have any other users synced in here yet. Now, if my task is to import 20 or 100 or even 1,000 users, the first thing that I'm going to want to do is connect to my LDAP server where these users exist. So I'll come to Tasks and take a look at the import tasks. And today you'll notice I have an import task called the LDAP import. I'm going to click on that. And you'll see the basic connectivity options that are defined here to connect to my LDAP server. You'll find that there's mappings for users, groups, and security roles. And I can also fine-tune the details from my LDAP server to sync my domain accounts, my email addresses, the display names, as well as how the memberships are going to work, group membership as well as role membership. Now, in this example, I'm actually using the same property in LDAP, which is called member of for both groups and roles, and that's fine. I could do one or the other. I could keep them the same or I can keep them different. It just depends how your LDAP server is set up. Now, I work for a mid-sized enterprise, and we've got thousands of users in our LDAP. I certainly don't need to import my entire corporate directory into NPrinting. So I will take advantage of these features, which are filters. These are going to filter the list of users, the list of groups, as well as the list of roles that will come into NPrinting. And these are LDAP filters. These are LDAP filters that I can use. So for example, although I have thousands of users in my LDAP, and I'm going to use a generic browser here to take a look at that, I'm going to come in here and just test out my filter in advance. before I go much further here. And I'll do a directory search. I'll pop in the filter that I devised. I'll hit enter. And it won't pull back all thousands of users in there. It'll just pull back the groups and users that I'm interested in that happen to be a member of a specific group in the LDAP server. So in this case, it's only about 15 to 20 users. So this same filter that I know works against my LDAP server, I'm going to use an NPrinting to do the import. So before I get started, let's just do a quick check. If I go to users, as you saw before, I only have these two basic users. If I go to groups, I actually don't have any groups. And for security roles, I have the 4 basic roles here, but notice that I do have another role that exists already. Now this role I had to create manually in advance. It's called the DL Northeast Presales role. This is a role that is actually already in my LDAP server. And there's a little twist in this import in that the import from LDAP is not actually going to create the role, but as long as the role is pre-created in NPrinting, I will be able to dynamically assign the imported users to that role based off the information in LDAP. So for example, if I go into my users today, I'll take a look at my current user and I click on the roles. I'm just going to remove this for now and make sure that it's not assigned to that role. This user is not assigned to any group either. And then I'm going to come back to my import task, and we're going to go ahead and run it. Okay. Now there is a test option if you're trialing this for the first time, so you can see how many users and groups will get imported without having to saturate your NPrinting environment as you test. This is a great feature to use. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and run the full batch and hit run now. And as this is running, I do have a task execution feature, which I can go to check and see how the task is running. Almost done at 82% here. And once things are done at 100%, I can go back to users and see the full population of users that came in. So now I see all the same users that are in here. And if we go back to the user that I started with before, you'll notice that the groups are now assigned. A dynamic group has been created and assigned to my user. And the security role that already existed has now been dynamically reassigned as well. And this is the same for other users in the system. They are also a member of this role, and they are also a member of this group. And you'll notice that under groups, I do have that group created, okay, because that was also going to be imported. So this is great, because now other users can come and log into the system. For example, if I log out now, I can actually use my Windows login, and instead of being logged in as the generic NPrinting administrator, I'm now logged in as myself. And so the single sign-on system is also working because I brought in the right credentials from Windows through the LDAP import. So now I'm set up for logins as an administrator, as a developer, as a task creator. And I've also imported all the email addresses, which is going to set me up to do published tasks. So if I take a look at 2 published tasks that exist today, I have these 2. I'm going to click on the second one. And if I take a look at who this task is going to be sent to, I can now add the group that I've imported. This is that DL Northeast Presales group. And anybody in the user repository who is a member of this group is now going to receive this email. So let's just take stock of what we were able to do here. At the top, we imported users, we imported groups, and we also imported the memberships of the users to the groups and pre-existing security roles. In the bottom left, I told you you had to go to the web console first to create the security role. So as long as the security role is created in advance, you can import it. And the memberships are imported straight from LDAP. Now on the right-hand side, what we didn't do is do any user filters. User filters are not typically stored in an NPrinting repository. And for that reason, we'll have to do an extra step if we want to do user filters. If we don't want to do a second step to do the user filters, we can easily just apply section access security as an alternative to NPrinting user filters. In the next demonstration, we'll go back to doing an Excel import. This is where we can put user information groups and filters all together and import into NPrinting. Now, security roles, again, must be created in advance, and that's fine. Let's take a look at a sample import from Excel. The sample import from Excel is going to have 3 tabs. It's going to have a Filters tab, a Users tab, and a Groups tab. So these are 4 new users I'm going to be importing. And you'll notice on the right, my associations or memberships are stored here in a comma delimited format. So these new users are going to be part of the salesman and as well as my existing group. And for roles, they're going to be dynamically assigned to these roles, even roles that I've already pre-created that are non-default. You'll notice there's some new names for the groups. These are actually defined on the last tab. They have a group name and a group description and whether enabled or not. And for the first time, I'm going to start importing some filters. So these filters are going to be imported. They're going to be assigned to the existing sales demo application. And I can see the syntax and formulas of how these filters will be imported as well. So coming back to NPrinting, let's take a look at my next import task, which is an Excel import. With Excel, you just browse to the spreadsheet you want to use. You make sure it's set up in the correct format. There's a sample in our help files for NPrinting. And notice the settings here. These settings become important for repetitive imports. So this is going to support create, delete, and update options for users, groups, and roles, and filters as well. So all of these options allow you to continuously update, and you can use multiple import sources to get the desired effect that you want, mixing and matching LDAP and Excel if you wish. I'm going to go ahead and run this. The Excel import is actually runs quite quick because it's such a small Excel spreadsheet. This is already done. If I come back to users, I'll notice some new users that have just been imported. For example, Mary Smith here has now been imported. She's a member of Salesmen and the existing group, DL Northeast Presales, as well as an administrator and developer roles. Note that by importing Mary as a member of this group, she will now be on the recipient list of the task that we showed before that is already sending to the same group. So I'm able to dynamically update that. Note also that the filters have been updated as well. So if we go to the filters, there's 4 new filters that have been imported. So if Mary's going to be receiving reports from the sales demo application, she will have data filters applied to her information because the filters have also been imported. So that was a lot to cover in the last 10, 15 minutes or so. But just wanted to make sure you are aware of the details of users, groups, and filters that can be imported, as well as the memberships to filters, groups, and security roles that can also be imported. And this holds for LDAP and it holds for Excel as well. In the final 5-7 minutes of this presentation, what I wanted to take you through next is a nifty sample of how we can use the NPrinting API to perhaps find some even greater nuance in how we do the imports and user management of users in NPrinting. So let's jump to API-based user imports with a Qlik application. So it is possible to load users and filters and data information into a Qlik application and then have it pushed into the NPrinting repository. Now, we cannot use a user import task to do that because that only supports Excel and LDAP. However, we can use the API to do this. And the way we're going to do it with NPrinting and Qlik is to couple the tasks together. So most Qlik environments today might create QVDs, and upon generating the QVDs, they could reload a Qlik application. The intent with this technique is that once you've reloaded the Qlik application, which now contains the data for NPrinting, we can trigger a sync and an update of users in NPrinting so that the NPrinting recipients are updated in advance of actually distributing NPrinting reports. And we can do this all through the Qlik Sync Task Scheduler and the Qlik View Publisher. Let's take a look at how we can do that. So back in my Qlik Sense environment, I will log back into the active session, and we'll take a look at a Qlik application that has been specifically designed to do an NPrinting user write. So I'm going to open just a generic Qlik application here. It's called Sync Users from Sense to NPrinting. And we're going to do all of this logic in the data load editor in the Qlik Sense application. And in here, you'll see a series of steps. And what we're going to be doing is using two REST connector data connections. And these are going to be using the generic Qlik REST connector that's shipped with Qlik. We're going to connect to the NPrinting API with both of them, and it's going to allow us to read and write user information to the NPrinting repository. Now, in this sample, we decided to get even more clever, and the first thing we're going to do is actually read the users from Qlik Sense. So Qlik Sense is also a user repository. In fact, if you import users from your Active Directory into Qlik Sense, you may not know this, but your email addresses are also imported at the same time, which is very important because now we can use the Qlik Sense repository and the email information that surrounds the users to import to NPrinting. So once we read the users from Sense, we can also log into NPrinting and read users from NPrinting. Once we have a list of both users, we can reconcile what we want to do. We can either decide to delete users in NPrinting, create them, or update them on a user-by-user basis. In this example, I'm going to decide whether to delete, create, or update them based off variables that I set at the beginning, which is decide whether I want my script to do creates, do deletes, or do updates. I've also put some additional information in my script around what is the NPrinting administrator and where my NPrinting and Qlik Sense servers live today. So before I run this example, I will just reset my, my Qlik environment. I'll go ahead and delete the filters that already exist here. And I will go into the user environment. And I will delete all the users except for myself and the generic NPrinting administrator. So these are all gone too. Now my Qlik Sense environment contains these users. I've got some internal users. I've got some users that belong to this Qt cell directory, and I have another directory here at the bottom. In my Qlik example, I'm just going to import the Qt cell directory, so I can put that as a variable and filter the users. I'm going to go hit load data and run through this entire script. So step by step, it's going to use the REST connector connections that we defined, and it's going to use the script logic that you'll find inside this application to systematically loop through and create the users that it needs to in the NPrinting environment. And lo and behold, when I refresh, you'll notice that all the users have been updated to match the users that were already in Qlik Sense. And finally, as an administrator, I can do all of this administration straight from the Qlik Sense QMC. So here, my Sync Users from Sense to NPrinting application is associated with a task. So if I, once again, wanted to reset this demonstration and delete all the users, I'll hit go, reset everything. So I'm back down to my 2 users. And if I just have an administrator now go into the QMC and hit start, they can now kick off this NPrinting application as a task. It will run behind the scenes. And as I refresh the user list, eventually they will get repopulated in here. And of course, when I set up my tasks in NPrinting, I can put all kinds of triggers in here, which is to make the trigger dependent on other task event triggers. So I can pick another application, for example, like the reloading of a Qlik application, and also tie it to the publishing of NPrinting reports using similar techniques. There's lots of uses for the REST connector in Qlik Sense and QlikView for that matter that we haven't reviewed today. This includes distributing reports after a Qlik refresh, updating users and filters from the Qlik application, reloading metadata, timing out long-running tasks, task failure notification via publisher or via custom task to administrators, scheduling imprinting via the QlikSense QMC, as you saw, as well as QlikView Publisher, and monitoring and chaining the tasks from a common scheduler in Qlik. There are some additional resources for you to utilize today. To get started, you'll find some demonstrations on community as well as some notable help topics.
Okay, so now it's time for Q&A. If you have any questions, you can submit them on the left side of your On24 console in the Q&A panel.
Okay, great. So let's go through some of the questions that we received. One of the questions was whether you can do user imports from LDAP. The answer is yes. You need the September 2018 version. Another question, can we export all the users in NPrinting? To export the users, you either have to export the full repository, or you can use the API technique that I showed at the end of the demonstration to read them through a Qlik application and then write them to a QVD or text file. That's possible with a Qlik. Next question, NPrinting Designer. Can we restrict the user to access only certain reports? You can, using custom security roles. As we saw earlier in the presentation, I can create custom security roles per NPrinting application. And then the reports that are assigned to the NPrinting application are the only reports that the NPrinting developer can see and develop. How to provide the section access to NPrinting reports, like how we apply for Qlik reports. NPrinting supports section access. In order for NPrinting to support section access, the main idea that you need to make sure you're set up on the NPrinting side is to go into individual users and make sure that the domain account is actually set. The domain account will be matched by NPrinting to the section access table in the underlying Qlik application. Once a match has been found, this user will receive a report that is filtered according to their section access profile, and that will not be broken. And this is the same with every user that receives the report, whether they're receiving it through a group membership or they're receiving it through an explicit user reference on the task. As long as you set up the domain accounts and that the values match the section access table, NPrinting fully supports section access with QlikView and QlikSense. Question, interested in the use of the REST connector? That is a very interesting topic. I've shown you a smidgen of what you can do with it during today's demonstration, which includes updating users. You can also use it to chain tasks, such as publishing and printing reports after refreshing a Qlik app. How do the features covered in this webinar vary across versions? Are they available in the version that was released at the beginning of the year? Nope, you need two updates. One is that the LDAP imports are only in the September 2018 version of NPrinting. Also, to use the REST connector, you must be using the version 1.3 of the REST connector. Version 1.3 of the REST connector shipped with the February 2018 version of QlikSense, and it's available as a separate download for QlikView. With QlikView, you need to download the version 1.3 REST connector on the machine where you're running QlikView Desktop, as well as the publisher machine or the QlikView server, which is doing the reloads. Is it possible to have the NPrinting reports in the web? Yes, for external access, internet-based reporting, we recommend a reverse proxy, which is going to be fully supported in the November NPrinting edition, and we recommend changing the ports to ports 443 for standard web porting to Newsstand. You can also rely on SAML-based security, JWT security for your internet-based users. What level of access does NPrinting have to do its job? NPrinting must be a local administrator on the local machine. The service account must be a local administrator. It must be a domain account as well to run the services, as the domain account is used to log into QlikView and QlikSense, which is running on a separate server. We are currently using a network administrator account and want to reduce its usage. You don't need to be a network administrator to run the NPrinting services, just a local administrator on the machine, as well as a domain account. How to import users that exist within the QVW that the report is based on. In order to import users in NPrinting version 17 and above, the only technique is API-based. And one of the interesting ways of using the API is to use the Qlik REST connector in the Qlik load script. Does NPrinting involve named and document cals as well? NPrinting does not use document cals. With QlikView, the QlikView desktop on the NPrinting engine must be licensed for use by the service account. The service account can leverage a local client license, or it can reference a named user license. It does not use a document license. What is the best way to handle users on multiple reports with different filters? Achieving different user-specific filters with different reports requires you to add a table to the data model. Now, this is more complicated, but what you can do is you can add a user filter that references its own name and a report filter that references its own report name. And then add a table to the associative data model, which lists the combinations of usernames and reports and associates them to the data values that's relevant. That way, the combination of the user and the report will modify the filter context using the associative logic in the Qlik application. How to write complex syntax for complex filters when importing users from LDAP. In order to import complex filters from LDAP, you cannot do that. Filters don't get imported from LDAP today. What you need to do is either have the user information in Excel as well and import them from Excel, or probably better yet, import them through a Qlik application, which can manage the filter and data information quite well and inject it into the NPrinting repository, making filter associations along the way. The only other option is to manually do this in the web console. How to authenticate non-Active Directory users, SAML with section access. If you have a SAML system today, you just need to make sure that the users who are logging in your SAML configuration are going to be tied to the directory and user ID that is specified in the domain account property, as you can see on screen, of the user. So domain account is actually used not only for section access, it's also used to identify SAML-based users, Windows-based users, and JWT users. Domain accounts are vital for SSO systems as well as section access. So the SAML token will actually be providing both the directory and the user ID, and it simply doesn't match up with the existing user that is already in the NPrinting repository to authenticate the user under that identity. Can we chain different tasks in NPrinting using the API? Yes, you create a different Qlik app for each task. And then in the QMC or in Publisher, you can chain the task loads as reload tasks as you would any other Qlik application. How can you manage more business partners with full control without seeing the apps from other partners? Now, you can partially do this because security roles will allow you to filter access per application. So different partners can have different applications, and the roles that the users from either partner belong to can only see the reports that belong to each other, that belong to the local partner. However, keep in mind, NPrinting 17 and above only supports a single user directory. So the users, once you create the task, will be visible by the task administrators belonging to both partners. Why is there a limitation to assign a filter to only one app and connection? NPrinting 17 and above does not support linked fields or fields that are shared between applications. This is an enhancement request to date. How to deal with situation when user email is not unique in recipients. NPrinting disallows reusing an email in different users. The username and the user email can only be used once throughout the entire directory. If there is a use case to support both, we'd definitely like to hear about it, and feel free to write in and ask the question. Is there an automated way of adding bulk users via Excel or XML instead of creating one by one? Yes, as you saw today, you can use an import task with Excel, and you can get even fancier if you load that same Excel document into a Qlik application and do some additional fine-tuning and to use the API to inject that into NPrinting as well.
Okay, Johnny, we have time for one more question.
What does user management look like when distributing thousands of reports to thousands of recipients? I find the easiest way to do this is to do it through a group membership, so that the tasks that are being sent to sending reports out to users are actually identified through groups. And as a user management system, you just have to make sure that NPrinting is kept up to date with the right group memberships, syncing through LDAP or syncing through Excel or a Qlik application, as you saw today.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you to Johnny for presenting. We always appreciate getting experts like Johnny to share with us. Here's our legal disclaimer. And thank you once again. Have a great rest of your day.